A father puts his demons to rest, but sometimes the past refuses to stay buried. Isaac Carter had once been a nightmare whispered in the dark, an elite Delta Force operator, a ghost who left chaos in his wake across 3 continents. But those days were gone. He had locked away the shadows, trading war zones for playgrounds, combat for bedtime stories. His son, Elijah, was his entire world, and for him, Isaac had left behind the life of bloodshed. For years, the ghost had remained at peace. Until one day, 2 cops shattered that peace in the blink of an eye. One careless, brutal act against a defenseless 7-year-old child. One arrogant smirk from men who believed their badges made them untouchable. "You're nobody," they sneered at Isaac. They couldn't have been more wrong. Because the ghost now walks again, calm, calculating, and utterly merciless. And as a hidden web of corruption scrambles to cover its tracks, they are about to learn a truth more terrifying than anything they've ever known. You do not understand true violence until you provoke a man who mastered it. A man who chose to walk away. A man you forced to return. The golden hues of the late afternoon sun stretched across Oakwood Heights, a quiet suburban neighborhood where every house had a manicured lawn and white picket fences. It was the picture of safety, of normalcy. But safety is an illusion, one that would soon be shattered. Isaac Carter steered his black SUV into the driveway of his modest 2-story home. As the engine died, he exhaled, loosening his tie. 5:30 p.m. Right on time for dinner with Elijah. 3 years had passed since he'd left the battlefield behind, pouring his focus into his private security firm, Sentinel Solutions. The business gave him purpose, but nothing compared to the joy of raising his son. Life had fallen into a peaceful rhythm, one he had come to cherish. At 42, there were more lines around his eyes, and flecks of gray now peppered his close-cropped hair, but his body remained strong, his movements still precise, trained, disciplined, deadly. He maintained that discipline out of habit, not necessity, or so he thought. Stepping inside, he was greeted by the warm smile of Mrs. Wilson, their elderly neighbor who watched Elijah after school. She gathered her knitting and gave him a nod. "Right on time, as always, Mr. Carter." "That's me," Isaac replied, setting down his briefcase. "Elijah's outside with his new ball."
"Such a good boy," she said fondly.
Isaac reached into his wallet, placing a crisp $20 bill on the counter despite her usual protests. Did he finish his homework? Every bit of it. Even those extra math problems his teacher assigned. That boy's sharp as a tack. Pride warmed Isaac's chest. Just like his mother. For a brief moment, a shadow flickered across his face at the thought of Elijah's mother, but he quickly buried it. "Thank you, Mrs. Wilson. I'll see you tomorrow." She patted his arm and left. Isaac changed out of his suit, swapping it for jeans and a navy Henley. This was his favorite part of the day: dinner, homework, then curling up with Elijah for their nightly reading ritual. But as he glanced out the kitchen window, his easy smile faded. The backyard was empty. A second later, a sound tore through the quiet evening air. A scream. High-pitched. Frantic. Elijah. Isaac's world shifted in an instant. Instinct overrode thought. His body moved before his mind could process the scene unfolding before him. He was through the front door in seconds, his steps smooth, precise, predatory. And then he saw it. His son. Face down on the asphalt. A police officer's knee grinding into his small back. The blue ball lay forgotten, rolling away into the gutter. A crowd had gathered. Neighbors frozen in shock, their expressions etched with disbelief. "Stay down, kid," barked the cop, a stocky man with a buzz cut and mirrored sunglasses. The name on his badge, Reynolds. Isaac's voice cut through the commotion like a blade. "That is my son.
Get your
Hands
off
him
now."
Reynolds barely spared him a glance. The pressure on Elijah's back didn't ease. Instead, the officer scoffed. "This your kid? Maybe teach him not to run at police vehicles." A second officer stepped out of the squad car. Older, taller, his detective's badge gleaming under the streetlights. Cold eyes locked onto Isaac. Step back, sir. We've got this under control. His hand rested casually on his holstered gun. Isaac took a single step forward. Deliberate. Measured. Every muscle in his body coiled, but his hands remained visible. A silent warning for those who knew how to read it. My son was retrieving his ball. You threw him to the ground like a criminal. Remove your knee. Now. Detective Connor's smirk was infuriating. Your boy ran toward a police vehicle in a suspicious manner. Officer Reynolds followed protocol. Protocol? For a child. Elijah's sobs broke through the tension, his small frame shaking. Daddy, it hurts. Something inside Isaac shifted. A slow, simmering rage. Colder than ice, sharper than steel. For years, he had kept that part of himself buried. The part that had once been ghost. The part that could move unseen, strike before his enemies even knew death was upon them. Last warning, Isaac said, his voice dropping to a level so quiet, so lethal, that even the bystanders took an instinctive step back. Release.
My
Son. For the first time, a flicker of hesitation crossed Reynolds's face. He finally lifted his knee, yanking Elijah up by the arm. The boy barely had time to find his footing before breaking free and running straight into his father's embrace. Isaac knelt, hands steady despite the fury coursing through his veins. Are you okay, buddy? Recognition flickered across the scarred man's face, his lips barely moving as he whispered a name that once sent chills through war zones. Carter. His fingers moved swiftly, reaching for a secure phone. His pulse remained steady, but his mind was racing. So, the ghost still lives. Within hours, unseen hands would intercept the police body cam footage, a surgical, untraceable hack. Files would be copied, altered, and erased with a kind of precision that left no breadcrumbs. The wheels were in motion now. A test had been conducted, and the results were intriguing. For years, certain people had believed Isaac Carter to be dead. But tonight, they would learn just how wrong they had been. That night, after hours of quiet sobs and exhausted murmurs, Elijah finally drifted into uneasy sleep. His small body curled beneath the covers, face pale, bruises forming beneath his ribs. Isaac sat in the darkness of his home office, the only light coming from the cold blue glow of his computer screens. Multiple windows filled the monitor, background checks, personnel files, disciplinary reports. Detective Brian Connor and Officer Jake Reynolds stared back at him in digital form, their lives neatly laid out in confidential records and suppressed complaints. Isaac's fingers moved with practiced ease across the keyboard, bypassing security firewalls that would have stopped most government hackers. His face showed no emotion, but in his eyes, something had awakened. A fire that had not burned in years. They had hurt his son. Now they would learn why enemies once feared the ghost. The sterile lights of Mercy General Hospital's emergency room cast an artificial glow, making Elijah's face appear even paler than before. Isaac sat beside his son's bed, his large, calloused hand dwarfing the small fingers clutched in his grasp. His jaw was set, his expression unreadable, as Dr. Sarah Wells reviewed the scan results. He has a mild concussion, some internal bruising on his left side, and of course, the external contusions, she explained, her voice gentle but clinical. She glanced between the chart and Isaac's impassive face. Physically, he'll recover quickly. Children are resilient. But emotionally, her voice softened. I'd recommend speaking with our child psychologist. Isaac nodded, his thumb tracing absent circles over Elijah's small knuckles. Thank you, doctor. As soon as she left, Elijah stirred, his tired eyes meeting his father's. Why do bad people hurt us, Dad? The question struck Isaac harder than any bullet ever had. For most of his life, the answer had been simple. Because the world is full of evil men. And my job was to erase them. But how could he explain that to a child? How could he make his son understand the monsters that lurked beneath the surface of civilization? Isaac exhaled slowly. Sometimes people forget how to be kind, he said, choosing his words carefully. They let fear, anger, or greed make their decisions for them. Elijah frowned, considering his father's answer. His small brows knitted in thought. Were you afraid when you saw the police hurting me?
No.
The answer was immediate.
Honest.
But you didn't hurt them back. Isaac squeezed his son's hand gently. There are better ways to handle things. The words felt hollow. Even as he spoke them, something old and dangerous stirred within him. Muscle memory. Instincts. A predator awakening after years of dormancy. The calculated precision with which he could dismantle threats. The focus that had made him a legend. The training that had transformed him into a shadow. He forced a smile, brushing his hand over Elijah's hair. Get some rest, buddy. I'll be right here. Once his son's breathing evened out, Isaac stepped into the hallway and pulled out his phone. His fingers scrolled through his contacts until he found a name listed under a single word. Miles. He hesitated for half a second. Then he pressed call. The line clicked on the second ring. A rough voice answered. This line better be secure. It is. A pause. Then a low whistle. Ghost?
Christ.
It's been what, 3 years? Something like that. Miles's voice shifted instantly, serious now. You only call when there's trouble. What happened? Isaac's explanation was clipped, controlled, but the edge of anger in his tone was unmistakable. Miles exhaled sharply. Jesus. The kid okay? He will be. And the cops. Isaac said nothing. Silence was his only answer. Miles sighed. Listen, there's something you should know.
We intercepted some chatter last week.
Your name's been flagged. Isaac's fingers curled around the phone. By who? Don't know yet. But it's high level. Military, intelligence, maybe both. And the timing? Way too convenient to be a coincidence. A slow, burning realization settled in Isaac's gut. Watch your six, Ghost. This wasn't random. After hanging up, Isaac returned to Elijah's room, standing in the doorway, watching his son sleep. If Miles was right, and he usually was, this hadn't been an accident. This had been a test, a deliberate move. And that meant someone had used Elijah as bait. The next morning, after ensuring Elijah was settled at home, Isaac left. But he didn't go to his office. Instead, he drove to a storage facility on the outskirts of town. Inside, in a climate-controlled unit that had remained untouched for years, sat a set of reinforced metal cases. Each bore no markings, just heavy-duty locks protecting the contents within. Isaac pulled out a key that had never left his possession. With a single turn, the lock clicked open. He pulled back the tarp, revealing the gear beneath. Military-grade equipment that no civilian security consultant had any business owning. Tactical vests. Suppressors. Infiltration tools. His phone vibrated in his pocket. A text from an unknown number. This wasn't random. You were targeted. To test you. Isaac stared at the message, his mind piecing together the puzzle with lethal efficiency. He immediately tried to trace the number. Nothing. Whoever sent it knew what they were doing. Someone knew his past. Someone had deliberately placed his son in harm's way. And now, someone was watching. That night, after ensuring Elijah was safe and Mrs. Wilson was on watch, Isaac disappeared into the darkness. He wore black tactical gear, flexible, unrestrictive. His pack contained everything he needed: lockpicks, signal jammers, devices that blurred the lines between military operations and criminal activity. Officer Reynolds's apartment complex was laughably unprotected. Within minutes, Isaac had bypassed the car alarm, planting a high-grade tracking device beneath the driver's seat. A cloned phone signal ensured he had access to every incoming and outgoing call. Detective Connor's house, however, was far more interesting. It was expensive. Too expensive for a detective's salary. Isaac moved with practiced silence, slipping inside undetected. By the time he found Connor's home office, the puzzle had begun to form. Bank statements with offshore deposits. Case files with patterns of targeted harassment. And deep within Connor's personal emails, communication with someone known only as V. References to asset acquisition. Leverage operations. Isaac photographed everything. By dawn, he had compiled a dossier that would send shockwaves through the city. At 6:42 a.m., Detective Brian Connor's phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. You're being watched. Every move. Every word.
And now,
It's your turn to be afraid.